Aisha Survey here. Thank you for joining us for this podcast. I have with me a special friend, somebody I've admired from afar and close by, Sadaf Pig. Sadaf has a great organization that she runs called the um, Media Matters for Democracy. And she's been working essentially for an open web, an open internet, more access to internet, more access to communication, and a free digital and media environment. In addition to this, Sadaf is also somebody who, really fights for women, and particularly with regard to the space, the domestic space within the household, and the need for it to be shared. So, welcome, Sadaf, to this podcast. Did I kind of describe you accurately?
Yes, thank you, Aisha. You were so kind. I
No,
think,
so Sadaf, I've known you since like forever, but off and on, I've been more interested in your two, I think, cutest little, children. The first one I
wonderful.
came, I mean, you're the only person I think in Islamabad who I've kind of gone and seen when they've had a kid. I've never had the time to kind of visit anybody, but honestly, like it was just like I think your spirit, the way you approach life has always been incredible. So
That makes me feel special, Aisha. Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah, and remember when I went to see your firstborn, I was like cradling him, and he loved me. It was suddenly like Aisha auntie is so mothering, which is very hard for people to believe. They think I'm very stuck up and horrid.
I remember being really, I was so overwhelmed at the time. I didn't know. I was still figuring out the sleep routines, figuring out how to put the baby to sleep.
Hmm.
And you came and I was like, this is possible. And how do I do that? So, yeah, thanks for that day.
Yeah, no, you're most welcome. And I think young mothers are just like sort of thrown into the fire. It's kind of this conspiracy that the universe has against us. It's like, so you want to be settled. Let's kind of just throw you into the deep waters and show you hell, right? Because
I
there's the
know, and this
birth,
is like,
right, which
what
is
you were
traumatic.
saying, it is. And this idea that everything should come so naturally and this maternal instinct, it somehow, it's the idea that it's coded into your DNA, what to do for your child and how not to be overwhelmed and how just to be present in a moment where your mental, your finance, emotional, and physical health are at their most vulnerable. This
Mm.
expectation is something you'd never see thrown on anybody else in any other situation.
I think I
I
can
think
I
that's
can call it this
important.
over obsession with mothering or mamta as we call it in our society. Like the maa ke paon ke niche jannat hai, maa ko pata hota hai, everything a woman knows intuitively. She will know if a child is hungry. She will know if a child is upset. She will know if a child is sick. And frankly, sometimes I really felt कि ये जो maternal ambivalence होती है ना, where you have your child and you're unwell because the
Yeah.
trauma of childbirth itself has been underplayed. Okay, how dare you talk about the trauma of childbirth because you've been lucky enough to be blessed with a child, right? So usme
Yeah.
you're not even given the time to identify or to feel the physical and the mental wreckage that happens to your body.
And if you do dare to do that, if you do dare to take stock, and especially if you ever do that publicly, then you are made to feel um, like you're literally sinning, I would say.
Right, let's talk
You
about
get
it.
those
What is the
horrified
word? What is the
reactions.
word, Sadaf, that people use for people who talk about the reality of the difficulty of mothering? What are some of the words? So there's obviously the bad mother, or kya hota hai?
Yeah, there's obviously the bad mother, and um, I don't know. I've heard career oriented thrown as
I've heard a
something.
lot of
Uh,
ambitious. I've heard
yeah,
selfish. I've heard,
selfish, yes, definitely
yeah, a lot of.
selfish, and
Hmm.
westernized, and which makes me feel so strange. I mean, what do you mean? Do westernized women have no instincts for their children? And how does it negate what I'm feeling right now? One of the most, I would say, hurtful. I don't know. One of the things that tried to kind of push me over the edge was breastfeeding. It
Hmm.
was supposed to come naturally. It's a really, really difficult experience. It's something that everybody has to learn, and yet to even dare to ask for help. even from your medical team, even from your nurses, um, the looks you get for not instinctively knowing how to feed your child,
Hmm.
and the lack of support in that regard, it's astounding. I never, like,
So,
before I
Sadaf,
went through it,
tell us
I never.
your breastfeeding challenge, and then I'll tell you mine, or I might start with mine just to tell you how horrific it is.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
after
please.
the birth of my first daughter, this was in 2003, sorry, 2004. I basically obviously gave birth, and automatically, like, I wanted to feed her, and I was, as a career person who had to go to work the 10th day of work, I really was insistent that I want to feed my daughter breast milk for at least 1 year. So it was an obsession. It was like, sort of like, oh, because I am so horrible and I work, therefore the least I can do is feed her. So I started to have her latch on, and she wouldn't latch. And a latch is a scientific term for when a child sort of suckles the mother's breast in the right way, so that the mother doesn't end up with an object on her body that pretty much is abscessed and rotten, right? Because eventually, hota hai ki if
Yeah,
a child doesn't suckle correctly, you end up having something called mastitis, right? Which I did end up
yeah,
having. So the first 2 days, I couldn't draw any milk, and the shaming that I got for it was like, "Oh, you're not healthy enough to give the child milk." For the first 2 days, I was so upset at myself. I was like, "Why am I not getting milk?" And the sad thing is, nobody knew why. The nurses didn't. The older women in my family didn't. And the fact is that the first 2 days, sometimes your milk doesn't draw because you have something called colostrum, which is like literally 1 teaspoon a day of transparent
and
liquid,
that
which
is
is the
enough.
most
That is
important
enough.
part of
That is the
breastfeeding.
thing. Yeah.
So I was being hurt and shamed for the very science with which God has made me and my child. And because of that shame, it was so traumatic for me that I couldn't feed her. And I was being like, oh, you're not good enough. Your body's not good enough. And they had this whole thing about, it's so horrendous that then I had mastitis, and then mastitis is an infection of the breast. Basically, it was horrible. I think if birth was traumatic, breastfeeding was twice as traumatic. And I carried the shame with me, and I was so sad. I, by the way, kept feeding her during that pain. And I did feed both my daughters for about a year, and it's the only one thing that I did. But the pain that came with it, I think, tells us how disproportionate it is that we put a burden on women, particularly women who work, for something that is just not their fault.
Yeah.
What's your
No,
story?
what you just said about breastfeeding being at times more traumatic than birth itself. You're not the first person I've heard that from. Um, I've thankfully never had any issues with my supply or anything, but when you are breastfeeding for the first time, getting the latching technique right, getting the child to understand your body, getting to understand your child's preferences, in itself, it's so physically draining. I had a C-section, obviously sitting after the C-section, that's difficult in itself. And I just couldn't figure out how to make him latch. And I went to the hospital twice after being discharged. I went just to get lactation advice. And all I got was, नहीं आप ऐसे पकड़ लें, आप ऐसे पकड़ लें, आप क्यों सही नहीं कर रही हैं? I'm like, that's not the tone you talk to me with. I'm here because I can't figure it out. I'm completely vulnerable. I'm traumatized by everything that birth brings with it. I'm overwhelmed by, being literally the life force for a teeny tiny baby. And then to hear people using tones that are full of condescension. um, and then obviously there was this whole um, thing that if it's not working out, just switch to formula.
Hmm.
And if a mother doesn't want to do that, what she wants is people around her to support her and understand that, okay, she might be choosing to go through that journey, of taking on the pain of trying to get to a place where it's easy for her and easy for the baby. So rather than invalidating her choices, or holding her responsible for a choice that's so painful and difficult, maybe just lend support and say, yes, you'd get there. You'd get there. It will get better. And that's what I tried to do eventually when my other friends started having children.
So one of my very close
A,
friends
ignoring,
is very grateful that I insisted that she does breastfeeding and that I insisted that she keeps at it, because I think, women who work, it's very important for them to bond during the feeding process, because they hardly get time, and it's the only allowed time. So when a mother is not with her child feeding her directly, she's expected to clean the toilets and cook
yeah,
the food. I mean, there's also that, right? I mean, household, and
there's
this is what I want
always,
to
yeah.
move to next, because this is a sort of COVID special podcast. So domestic politics, can you talk to me about that, like the division of roles within the house between a mother and the rest of the members of the household? Sometimes you have ranging from 13 upwards, or 7 upwards, and yet you will see that if you're a mother or if you have children, the expectation is that you will know how to quote unquote run the house, and running the house is basically doing 7 people's job. Sometimes it requires even paying the bill, sometimes it requires cleaning it, sometimes it requires taking care of the children, sometimes it requires food, and everything in between. It also requires emotional well-being of everybody in the house, so people should be happy if you're running the house. So running the house also means running people's happiness. So many uncontrollable variables are given to a mother, because apparently she's considered to be this all-knowing perfect being with the magic wand.
And no needs of her own. I mean, yeah, I think this is such an existential kind of an issue with how we treat motherhood and family systems in our culture and globally as well. I won't say much from my own experience, because we do have, thankfully, a more equal workload in in like my own family system. But that's what I've grown up with, seeing my mom um being given a specific budget. She was not a working woman, so she didn't have any financial independence. She had a very limited budget. But even though the budget was limited, the expectation of a very smooth running of the house was not limited.
Mm,
Everything was supposed to get done somehow. We are five-fifth siblings. She was supposed to, from our educate, from feeding us, to making sure that we're getting good grades, to making sure we are not too rowdy when my father came in, for example, and making sure that her own grievances were put aside for a day, where when everybody else had the mental space to kind of listen to even what she was going through. And that's the story we see repeated everywhere.
mm,
शौहर बाहर से थक के आ रहा है तो बीवी दिन भर की frustrations ना निकाले. That's what we hear.
mm,
Yeah,
mm,
you come in, the wife has to be looking good, she has to be smiling, she
mm,
has to lay out whatever food she has cooked, and like say nice things and happy thoughts, and put everybody else in a relaxed frame of mind at the cost of her own sanity. And day after day after day, and you know and without any validation. And I mean, the validation part, it's so understated. It is important. Like, we're working women, even at workplace, if you put in an effort and nobody acknowledges, it hurts. So imagine if your life revolves around doing the mundane, which in itself brings no particular sense of accomplishment,
Can
and
I
you are
pause you
caught up
there,
in this
Sadaf, and
mundane bit of,
repeat what you just said? You said that the
yeah. So
mundane doesn't bring any particular sort of pleasure. Can we talk about that? Because it's also like mothering, na? We're supposed to 100% right after birth know everything perfect about mothering. Once
yeah,
we marry and we have a household, we're supposed to know exactly what to do about it. But the fact of the matter is, there is no joy in washing dishes that pile up every meal, and that exactly
yeah.
look the same, and then repeat the same year after year after year after year. Nor is there any particular joy in cleaning a floor, nor is there any particular joy in cooking food. Honestly, everybody's like, oh, food is sacred and it's beautiful to cook it and it's creative and all of that. But you know what? Sap the energy out of creativity by making it mandatory on a woman to cook at a particular time, to cook well, and then to never make a mistake on the quantity of salt or oil, and then to stand there and then get criticized for any slights, right? I
And
want
make
you to
sure
talk
that,
about the fact that it's not fun. Housework is not fun. I don't know who it's fun for, honestly, but it's probably
and
fun for people
I
who don't have to do it.
Yeah. So I hear people romanticize the feeling that one gets when their family is happy and well fed. Of course, everybody is happy when their family is well fed or whatever, but the actual labor of it, doing everything with your hands, never getting to use your brains in the way that we do want to use them. We are human beings. Most of us have had ambitions and dreams of our own, and then to get dragged and thrown into a cycle, it's like you're a hamster running on a hamster wheel, driving yourself nuts without accomplishing anything in particular, and also seeing your own life go by while you do that. We are not going to be young forever. Our minds are not going to be the same forever. Our bodies are not going to be the same forever. We are going to lose opportunities. We are going to get out of fashion in that sense. And as life goes by, and I see so many women stuck in doing chores alone, bearing the burden of it alone, and if being helped at some time, that also coming with this whole sense of एहसान कर दिया किसी ने, बहुत
Mm.
बड़ा कमाल कर दिया कि आपका हाथ बटा दिया. um, and then also losing respect of their own family members in that, the contribution that comes through doing the mundane that's important to run lives, that
Mm.
contribution doesn't really count for anything, because what did you do?
It's
You just
considered
mopped
it's
and
considered
broomed and
purely
put
women's work,
together,
right?
yeah,
So there's women's work and
okay,
then there's a man's work. And I wanted to take you to what we are seeing today, in terms of violence against women. And the previous podcast that I did covered that, and I want to not cover that too much, but a quick global statistics: 243 million women in the past 12 months have been in emergency rooms because of intimate partner violence. Because about 50% of the world is in lockdown, this essentially means that there's an increase in domestic violence, which is France is 30%, Argentina is 20%, Cyprus and Singapore are 30% and 33%. Canada, Germany, Spain, United Kingdom, United States have seen almost a doubling of the surge. But what's really interesting is that in developing countries, domestic violence reporting has gone down. Now, what I fear, and I was discussing this with somebody in my comment section, is that the women are dead, right? And so rather than taking them to the emergency room, you're probably burying them in your backyard. And it's hilarious, not in the haha way, but in this spine chilling way, that when you
yeah.
have, for mental health and physical well-being challenges like this, where women are being worked to the bone in household chores and in terms of the field work that they do, and majority of Pakistani women have to get water from outside, have to like really fight their way around. And for those women, we are saying that, you know, their lives are getting approximately 30 to 50% worse. You know, I that's just a statement. I mean, I don't even know what to ask after that, except that, can somebody please help?
That's the thing, Aisha. Thinking about this makes me feel almost hopeless, because the stats you're quoting, they're bone chilling, but they're also reflective of the fact that people are ending up in the emergency rooms. They are getting help eventually, even when at the worst of it. In our country, when something happens, there was this really chilling news about a woman who was sent out to do groceries, I'm sure after doing everything that needed to get done in the house. But when she came back, her husband made her wash her body with bleach, because you might be bringing in back the virus. And so to think that you're putting your women who are literally keeping you alive,
As
because
human
most men
shield.
in our country would just die if the women in their
Yeah.
family stop taking care of them, and then treating them like this, like literally an animal who's bringing in disease, and you just hose him down. It's really something that makes me feel hopeless and trapped in this. This is all patriarchy. It's just the system, and we cannot think of solutions that are beyond actually fighting the patriarchal norms and structures that allow such power in difference to occur and sustain, and also keep women trapped in marriages and households, and even within their own families, where they know that they're going to go through this torture and this violence, um, And yet, that's why we see so many women looking up and talking up their own abusers so frequently, and justifying kind of their outbursts and their violent outbursts by saying, oh, they're stressed out, things are really bad right now, and yeah, I should have kept quiet or whatnot.
Or they have work
um,
pressure, right? I mean, the labor, the division of labor essentially proves that the number of hours of work and the intensity of level of effort that women do in the household, even if they're domestic women, is far more than the so-called intellectual and other work that men do outside the house. And now what's happening is that as men are constrained in the house, and maybe they're having to share some of the chores, women's chores or menial chores or lower end chores, what they're recognizing is that it's hard right, and it's no fun. And instead of recognizing that they have been abusing their privilege which society has given them to get away from household chores, they're now abusing their privilege even further by saying, you know what, I'm just going to lie here and be depressed, whereas you kind of just call me when the dinner is ready.
yeah, and you know what I fear, at least in our local households, when the men are depressed, the children are supposed to be quiet, and they're not supposed to behave like children. They're not supposed to laugh or run around or do anything that can trigger their fathers. And if they do what they're essentially meant to do, what children are meant to do, then the mother is to blame for not being able to control the children according to the father's whims. And it has such a deep rooted psychological impact on both the child and the mother,
It's
who
authoritarian, right?
either
I mean,
fails her husband
because
or
you're
her
wanting,
child, right?
you essentially want children to mute themselves exactly the way mothers have muted
Yeah,
themselves, right?
yeah. But and the mom who understands what the child is going through has this choice of either being abused by the husband or knowing that she's failing her children. And she really in that power dynamic, who does she really fail? Who's the more vulnerable party here?
Both
um
the children,
and
right?
that leaves you with so much more guilt than, we are all drowning with mom guilt. I don't know why. We, no matter what we do, I think we keep drowning in this, not doing enough. We are not engaging the kids enough. We are not giving them better food. We are not keeping them intellectually, emotionally stimulated. We are not creating enough avenues for them to burn out their energy. And then comes this, we are asking them to bear the burden of their father's tantrums. And that's such a horrible place to be. I saw my father had serious anger issues, and this is what I saw my mother go through every time he was triggered. And she would be keeping us quiet and also whispering in our ear about something fun we could do when he was not around.
How
And
sad,
as a
how
child,
sad.
I
I
didn't
mean, it's not,
understand
it's
it,
not,
but
it's not fun at all because I think children are far more intelligent than adults, all adults put together. They're so perceptive. They absorb their mother's sadness, I think, like a sponge. And so you
yeah,
can't make stuff up. If the father is abusive, the children will eventually understand that our mom had to placate our father throughout. And by the way, in large, I think joint family systems, which don't apply to people like me and you, but is the norm in
yeah,
Pakistan. It's not just the husband that's abusive. It's also the father-in-law. I mean, kal hum baat kar rahe the, there's so many father-in-laws that don't give women their daughter-in-laws permission to get the groceries or do a job in the fear that they might become bigger than their sons. And so it's an entire systemic discrimination against them. But going back to mom care, I think we also need to acknowledge that whereas kids are adorably cute, right? I mean, your beautiful young daughter, has gotten into the habit of, I believe, giving her hair a shampoo with honey, right?
yes,
Yeah.
yes, it's, yeah, I
As
don't
cute as
know who
that is,
introduced
somebody has to
that.
clean it up.
Yeah, it's hilarious when, well, I used to look at all these deep treatment thingies with food items, and I was like, this is so gross. And how can anybody do that? She's two, but yeah, I'll give her food and she'll just use her spoon to put stuff in her hair. Um, and right now, like, in the middle of this situation, where I have work, where I have, even with my husband's support, there's still, my work is my work. I have to finish my office's work. The household chores, even though divided, they are there, and the kids are there. There is no support of any kind, and in the middle of this, you having to get up and wash your child's hair um, three
In
times a
addition to
day.
washing their
It's not
bottom,
fun.
right?
Yes, it's just not fun, and it's exhausting.
So yesterday I was, my daughters have thankfully passed that age where I need to wash their bottoms. But yesterday I was going into the washroom. They were both sort of crowding me, and I had so much on my mind, and I was in the middle of deadlines and all of that. So I was like, I asked them to leave the room, but they didn't, because obviously they gravitate towards me, and it's so much fun hanging out with them. They're like a lot of fun. I think goes without saying that we enjoy mothering and parenting, and I think that's the best parts of our lives. I mean, let's put that
Yeah.
out there in case comment section where we get called bad mom again. But I went to the washroom and I was like, hey guys, I'm going to go to the washroom. So my younger one is like, yeah, I know that's where you escape us. So I was like, no, no, I really need to kind of go. And she's like, no, I know you. We all know you hide in there from us. And then I Googled, how many women hide from their children. And sometimes you really want to kind of disappear because of the sensorial overload of beautiful children you love, but sometimes there are times where you frankly don't. Right? So let's talk about that honestly. Is that okay? Is that normal? Should you feel horrid because you need your sort of mental health space? And people need a lot, sometimes people need little, but there must be spaces where you are um frankly hiding from your children.
Yeah, and I think I totally agree with you. The thing is, no matter what age children are, and we love them, obviously they gravitate to us because we love them, and because they know that we are their safe space, and we love being their safe space. So all the negative feelings and the emotions or whatever, the excitement, we get to see that, like, how do we say it, on the front lines. We are the first ones who get the full burst of it. And it's lovely. Most of the times it's lovely to get caught in that contagious, energy, or be there to support and whatnot. But yeah, at the end of the day, when you have done everything that you could do, when your body is ready to give up, and when your mind is literally, sometimes I hear this whistle, like physically hear a whistle in my head, and I'm like, I need to just take a few breaths, and I need to step away. And when you have like young children, especially during these COVID lockdowns, that space is disappearing. And it's scary sometimes, because you see yourself, you yourself reacting in ways you don't want to. I very consciously try never to be harsh with the children. I very consciously try not to scream or yell, even when they're doing things they know they're not supposed to be doing. They're pushing when I know they're pushing buttons every 2 days just to experiment, of about how I respond. But yet, yeah, you're so right that this need.
So sort of when you need a break, right? And I think a lot of moms need a break sometimes. What do you think of? Do you think of a vacation, or do you think of like me hiding in the bathroom? What is it? What's a break looking like for you?
I I want some quiet time, that, like, either in the washroom or somewhere where I can hear the silence, where I can either read or just close my eyes and think. A vacation would be lovely, but it's a luxury, and um, the thing is, vacations don't come every day, and the break that we need, I think there is a need to make some space every day, because if you don't, then you're moving towards burnout. You can't go to sleep with a mind that's in chaos totally, and you wake up with chaos, and you go through your day in that state, and it's just counterproductive. It's counterproductive for you, and it's also counterproductive for the way you respond to your children. Because if you don't clear out your head, if you don't get into that space where you have the mental energy and the emotional presence to consciously make decisions to a lot of things that children do to kind of push your buttons, um, then that's where you actually start behaving in ways that you don't want to be behaving in. I think the lack of discourse around mothers needing that space and, just to recharge, to refuel, I think that's scary. I never heard of it before I became a mom, and
Hmm.
as a very bratish, privileged child, I never actually thought of giving my mom that space. She never asked us for it,
Same. I
but
think
she
I
should
think the women
have,
of that generation were just, um, I think we've been privileged because we feel that maybe it's important for us to have space, right? I mean, for my mom, who was an extremely and is, mashallah, an extremely hands-on mother. I mean, like, I don't know how she did it. She ran the house, she did all of those things that I mentioned a good mother does. I don't know how she got that energy, and she never said no to us, and she was always there. And my siblings are brilliantly educated and very successful, so she really did it all. I mean, in terms of giving the rest of them spiritual and every kind of balance and success. But yet I've never heard her, remember her saying, you know what, give me a few minutes. I've never heard her, and yet I need it. Do you think it's us becoming less resourced or good people, versus maybe there was something different about that era that allowed them natural breaks that we don't now have? Because I was looking at my phone and my digital devices. I'm averaging literally 7.5 hours of screen time. When I'm not on the screen, I'm actually doing something very necessary, and there's this rush. So is there a generational difference, or are they just angels, our moms?
I think there is a bit of both. So our moms, they grew up in a space where, neither of us lives in a joint family. Yeah, neither of us has the kind of family support which comes with very heavy burdens itself. But yeah, is in terms of actual physical health, it's there. We don't have that. But more importantly, what I feel is because of the because of the time and because of the effort that our moms kind of put in us to make us individuals, to make us and they kind of helped us grow into people. And they didn't like and they grew into roles, I feel. When they were growing up, they were this, a wife and a mother, that those were the things. And we were kind of able to look beyond that. And once having looked beyond that, I do feel that self-awareness in that sense does come with its own burdens as well.
Yeah.
Knowing that you could be doing something that's more permanent, because I keep hearing, what's something better than, creating children who are good citizens or productive, or the thing is they grow into their own people. And your effort, it's only limited in terms of where does that take them. You give them the base, and then they take off, and then they become their own people. And nobody is going to talk about what the mom did. At least you would know that most of their accomplishments are their own, and you can be proud of them, but you can't be proud of yourself for them forever. And
You're
this
saying
need for
something so important.
self-actualization is very real, right?
You're saying something so important. I don't think we recognize that the lifetime of a mother, of active mothering, say if you have two kids, is like maybe 4 years, and if you have five kids, maybe 15. But people live till 90. What the hell are you if you're not an individual during those all those other times? And I want to identify that that is precisely why women are obsessed with their grown sons. I mean, you pretty much have
Yeah.
like a 50-year-old pot-bellied hairy bald guy running around like a 2-year-old, with a really horrific attachment style with his mom, and they feed off of each other's insecurities because she doesn't know who else to be, and he doesn't know how to detach from her because it's so unfair to leave a woman who's only defined motherhood as a role. You see?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a really toxic dynamic. It pushes women into a very specific role, and obviously them having to cling to that role um to kind of contain any sense of worth. um that really affects, that really, I think, screws up with people's minds. And they get threatened by daughter-in-laws, and which is just something I can't like, why this such. But if you think of it, if you think of it in terms of what they were and how they put all their investment into a child and put all their time and investment and put all their sense of being into that one role.
And somebody took it
um
away, right? So it's quite
yeah,
scary. Yeah, it is. You can
yeah.
understand where they're coming from. And a lot of people are like, oh, women should be women's allies. Are you kidding me? In a patriarchal world, if you're women's allies, you're out of here because you're not going to get any power, right? Because men have power. What are you going to do allying yourself with a woman when she has no power? So I mean, yeah, they sound good, कि feminism honi chahiye and you have to stick together with women, but it's not practically helpful for people to do that until the system changes or the laws change, and actually it makes sense for women to ally with both men and women, right? And the distribution of power, the ability of somebody to hurt you, resources, land, money, capital is equally distributed. Until then, I think you will always hate on women because it makes no sense to love them.
So true, so true. Yeah. I think, taking examples, which I hear very often, these stereotypes about women bosses being bad bosses, and औरत औरत की दुश्मन होती है kind of thing, and removing them from the reality, um, the tangle that patriarchy kind of creates around it. It's a spider web. And if you have to get out, you have to, if you have to create your own space, you have to get some power. And while it might not seem politically correct to say that, it's a reality, and most of us are just trying to survive and live our lives and not make political statements. So
Yeah,
even when there are alliances, within women, it's usually
secretive.
women who know that, yeah, they're secretive, and they know that from somehow from each other they can draw certain powers, right?
Mm.
There is always this tension of what I'm getting from this. One of the things that I do think defies this thing is the whole female friendship thing.
Mm.
And even that I see fizzling out as women grow up and start to create their own spaces. But when you are younger, and when you're just starting out, then female friendships give you that sense
When there are
of,
no men involved,
um,
right? It's wonderful.
yeah, they're, yeah, yeah,
And suddenly
it's
there's a man and you have kids with that man. So
yeah,
it becomes a bit of a zero sum game. And
yeah,
it's quite sad because I think, look, the fact of the matter is, as women who are lobbying for more understanding, that there's not one kind of woman. And that's what we want here. I think Sadaf, you and I are saying, okay, there's no one stereotype of being a mother or a woman or an individual or a working woman. There's several women and everybody brings their own spectrum. Please respect them for who they are. So what we want essentially is not the end of the family network or the importance of systems that work, such as shared systems when somebody is sick. Are, on the most part, our joint family systems have been a huge social net. I've seen brothers taking care of brothers in such a pure and beautiful way, and
yeah,
the family network working in a really nice way. But the problem is that you can't rely on it because not everybody is altruistic, not everybody has a positive dispensation. And then what do you do when somebody doesn't want to share their power, right? So then what happens is that women end up getting a really short bargain. End up getting bad nutrition, they end up getting no education, they get the bottom of the food chain scraps, right? And so that is what we want to recognize, that it's wonderful if these patriarchal systems work. But the fact of the matter is, according to today's statistics, United Nations women has basically quoted that violence against women causes 1 point, I believe, 2 billion in terms of losses for the economy. And so that's a real loss. We didn't make that up, right? And so we actually have to define how to essentially end it. In closing, Sadaf, I wanted you to also refer to what are some of the things women can do during the lockdown, because there's a hashtag trending called mothers as frontline workers during COVID, right?
yeah,
So what I found really useful is that I created a room of my own where nobody goes to. So it was essentially like a dungeon that nobody went to. It was used for storage or from somebody using it. It was like horrific. There were cockroaches rolling around and all of that. And I had too much of an ego to be like, okay, this is my house and I'm confined out of the 6 rooms in this house into one tiny little one where it's like dirtiest and dingiest, like a shack. But I've converted it into Zen area. I disinfected it, scrubbed it, and I having that space has changed my life because it feels like I no longer need to hide in the bathroom, and I can go to a place which is just quiet. The ringing in your ears, I think, is essentially um, uh, anxiety. It's called tinnitus when there's so much pressure and there's so much high blood pressure and stress that your ears start ringing. Um, and so that's a place where I just kind of go and breathe or slow down, even if it's for a few minutes. Um, so I found that useful. But is there any other tips you can give moms as frontline workers during COVID lockdown?
So what has helped me
Oh, by the
is
way, I'm
just
so
having
sorry I'm
a
interrupting you,
routine.
but that number is $1.5 trillion. The estimated global cost of
That's
violence
a
against
pretty
women.
huge number. That's a pretty huge number.
Yeah. So you were saying what
So
helped you?
yeah, so helped me just having a morning ritual to myself. Since the lockdown started, when I woke up in the morning, I had like four choices. I could either have breakfast, or I could take a shower, I could catch up on pending work, or I could clean up the kitchen. And for weeks, what I ended up doing is prioritize work or cleaning up over showering or having my breakfast in peace. Um, and what I found was by the time the kids woke up, by the time the work meeting started, my mind was already exhausted by the fact that I have didn't even have time to eat, or I wouldn't have time to eat with everything that was going on. So I took a pause and said, okay, this is not a selfish decision. If I have woken up early, I can let the work be, I can let everything else be, but having that morning ritual of sitting down, having my breakfast in peace, and it can be anything. It can be just like 10 minutes that you have to yourself without feeling guilty, without feeling the pull of everything that is pending on your to do list. Just having that something to start your day with, or having something to end your day with. I think that really helps. That helps you ground yourself.
Hmm.
Remember what's going on in your head. Take stock of it, breathe it out, and yeah, just that discipline of having a little ritual that's repetitive, it brings comfort in a way to me. And I think people can try that, and without feeling, yeah, as I said, the pull of everything pending on the to-do list for those 10 minutes, it really helps.
Yeah, and I think as moms, the one thing we're very familiar with is something called guilt. It's not just mom guilt that we're bad mothers. It's also that we're bad workers, we're not good enough, we're not present enough at work, we are not good enough for extended family, we don't have time to make calls and check on people. So it's like a list of so many things that we fail and we feel like a constant failure. So some of the things that
But
mothers
Aisha,
have
do
been,
you notice nobody ever calls us to check on us, apart from our moms and immediate family? But
that is
when
true.
you meet lots of people, everybody's like, you never call me, and
Mm,
I'm like, but did you call me?
yeah, yeah.
What's up with
So
that? I
sometimes
don't get
people are
it.
like, "Oh, you didn't call me," so I tell them that I was in the emergency room last weekend. I'm so sorry, and they move on to the next topic. They were like, "Oh, but yeah, next time call me." So a few tips that mothers discussed with me. One was obviously have a room of your own. My really good friend Aisha Alam suggested that. It's been revolutionary. Somebody suggested candles. So I know it sounds like very elitist, but apparently aromatherapy is really good. And if you light jasmine or something, apparently light candles around you. Somebody suggested doing basic stretching before you get out of bed. So like sitting on the bed and using some stretching techniques to just make your body move. So movement is very important.
I agree with that. I like just doing neck stretches and shoulder stretches. It does have a very visible impact on your mental health as well.
Right. And somebody else suggested hiding. So somebody was like, actually, hiding is a really good strategy. So just hide in a cupboard or something really obscure like that. And they said watch one series of a Netflix show because it feels like your dirty little secret. and it's not a crime, right? So they were like, just hide in the bathroom or whatever and just watch a Netflix series that you really like on your phone, on your earphones. Somebody else suggested, obviously, you can call up a friend or something of that sort. Journaling, I heard, was really good. So you just sit down and journal how shit your day is. And what you realize is when you put something on paper, it doesn't sound as bad as you thought it was, right? Sometimes even the cute stuff comes out. And then you realize, if you make a list of all the good things and the bad things, it's like, oh, it wasn't that bad. So it gives you some perspective. The other thing I suggest is like
Fantastic idea.
therapy. I think a lot of people feel like mental health is something that you talk about or you don't talk about, or it's stigmatized. But it's 2020, it's 2020 now, and I think it is time for us to acknowledge that everybody needs a cognitive behavioral therapist, because our lifestyles have become so horridly modern. There are no longer spiritual places you go to for prayers. There's no longer movements like pilgrimages. There's no longer community based stuff. We're locked up in our houses, we're staring at a screen, and everybody's lives look better than us. Therefore, it's very important to talk to somebody who knows how to help us frame things. So I think CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is very important. And lastly, I think I would take a friend's suggestion. And she said basically there was this one time I was just dying, like literally, I was like so in the pits with the clinical depression. And I called her up. Zarmeena is her name. She's a wonderful human being. And so she said, grow something. I was like, what do you mean? She's like, anything. I was like, what do you mean, fungus? So she's like, yeah, fungus. Like, grow anything that you see growing on an incremental basis, on a daily basis, either if it's a cactus or it's moss or it's anything. Just you have, because once you have something living in your care, and you have to tend to it every day, like water and sunlight, or a drop of water and a drop of sunlight, then you recognize that things move on without you, and that you have power. And then there's this dependency, a really nice dependency for you to do something every day. It allows you to build your own capacity as a living being. It's quite wonderful. I have the ability to kill a lot of plants, but so far, four of them are living for the past 1 month, ever since COVID's arrived. So that's one good thing.
Yeah, I think those are all really good tips. And um, I know it sounds, sometimes when I talk about self care, it sounds like something that only privileged people do. But I think it's important. It's not something selfish. It's actually important not just for yourself, but for your family. So if anybody feels that taking those 10 minutes out is something they cannot afford to do because of everything that needs to get done, know that you will get everything done in a more efficient manner with a better frame of mind if you do take out those 10 minutes. So think of them as service to others if you don't want to think of it as service to yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I tell my family members sometimes that, yeah, if you don't want me to become psycho, then you might as well give me this time. So a great way of negotiating. Sadaf, it's been fantastic talking to you.
Yes,
Ending on
it's
a
been
cute
great.
little beautiful note, do you want to tell us one more fun thing that maybe you've talked about? Your youngest one putting honey in her hair. What did the older one do?
Oh, he's yeah, so ever since the lockdown started, he has been planning his wedding. There is no bride in sight, but we know exactly what the menu would be. It will be chicken nuggets and Nutella sandwiches, and there are going to be wedding boxes in which we give chocolates to the guests. And the guest includes everybody from my office. So yeah, apparently a wedding is happening. I thought I was too young to be a mother-in-law, but okay, strange times.
You will be one of those terrible mother-in-laws, the one that judges your daughter-in-law for having it all. Yeah. So
Yeah,
my
so this one is
my
going to be an imaginary one, so I think that's fine.
that is seriously adorable. So my younger one, basically, she understands beauty and makeup quite very well. So she looked at me. She's like, and she sketches as well. She does beautiful digital art sketching. So she looked at me and she's like, you have a man's neck, mom. And I was like, what? And so she's like, yeah, well, when I sketch a person, if it's a man's neck, I start it from where it start is yours is starting, and if it's a woman, it's a very thin neck. And so I've been thinking about that for the past 5 days, and it's really bothering me. I have gained some weight, but like I didn't know I had a man's neck. And the other one basically told me that I have whiskers as well now. So yeah, I think COVID is taking all of us down, and these cute little things that the kids say, even if it's at our expense, is quite wonderful. And I really wish mothering upon everybody, because it's a beautiful thing to see something grow.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and especially when they start growing out on their own
Mhm.
and start learning things that you haven't taught them.
Oh yeah.
Even like my kids are just 2 and 3, and sometimes they come up with expressions I haven't taught them. It's such a delightful feeling to see that they're capable of learning themselves. And
Yeah.
yeah, it makes this all worth it. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes everything worth it, absolutely. And we tend to forget, and I think nature has put in us the ability of forgetting pain, because I think the pleasure of nurturing is so beautiful. But I wish that there was more sharing in that beauty, from the rest of
Yeah.
society. So on that, Sadaf, thank you so much for joining us, and it's been beautiful chatting with you.
Thank you, Aisha. It was really nice talking to you.
I'll see you soon after COVID ends. Bye.
Bye.